Here we have Goosebumps Horrorland. It's number 19, The Horror at Chiller House. Meet Jonathan Chiller. He owns Chiller House, the Horrorland gift shop. Sometimes Chiller refused to let kids pay for their gifts. He said, "You can pay me next time." What did he mean by that? Well, you're about to find out, because next time has arrived. 6 kids find themselves pulled from their homes back to Chiller's frightening shop. It's payback time, Chiller tells them. We're going to play a game. The kids quickly discover his game may have no winners. They have no choice. They must play to survive. They are trapped in the most terrifying Horrorland adventure of them all. Part 1, 1960. He didn't want to do his homework. He hated the big science and math textbooks. Sometimes he thought about ripping out each page, every one of them, one by one. He wanted to rip them out and crinkle them up and toss them into the fireplace. He'd be so happy watching them smoke and burn, except he didn't have a fireplace in his bedroom. His walls were filled with bookshelves. That's where he kept all his board games, and puppets and action figures and toy soldiers and costumes. Everything was all jammed together as if he were living in a big closet. Maybe that's why he spent so much time gazing out the window. His one window that looked out on his backyard. The grass was tall in the back. There were a few low evergreen bushes, and his mother had a small vegetable garden behind the wooden shed. That was all. The yard was pretty bare. No swing set or lawn furniture. No patio. No place to sit in the sun or play. Well, his parents didn't like him to play outside, and they definitely didn't like it when he sneaked out the back door and took himself for a walk in the woods. The backyard ended at the woods, so it was a short walk to the tall, tangled trees, the cool darkness, the tangy, piney smells, the crunch of dead brown leaves under his shoes. He liked to hide back there and pretend he was an explorer in a new country. You might guess that he had a good imagination, and you'd be right. He imagined that no one had ever walked there before. He was the first. He was discovering new lands and claiming them for himself. He battled the wild woods people. He defeated them. He destroyed them. Then he moved on to discover even more lands. He had to sneak out to do his exploring. Mother and father said it was dangerous in the woods. His father wouldn't go there without his hunting crossbow. Mother forbade him to go past the backyard. That's why he gazed out the window so often. Right now, 2 shiny black crows were fighting over a worm in the grass. He liked to watch them fight, the way they flapped their wings so furiously and pecked at each other. He liked to see them peck and peck and peck till the feathers flew and blood splattered all over the grass. Sometimes he imagined he saw kids in the backyard at the edge of the woods, kids his age who were coming to visit him. He imagined they were his good friends, and they were coming to play games and watch him do a puppet show and share secrets and have bowls of popcorn with him. He wanted to be a normal 10-year-old. He thought he could be a normal 10-year-old. He loved to go to school and have friends and go to birthday parties and sleepovers, but Mother said he was better than that. She said he had a special brain that must be nurtured. He didn't really know what nurtured meant, and he refused to look it up in that fat dictionary they made him keep on the corner of his big mahogany desk. If he had a special brain, he didn't want it. He'd give it back. He'd trade it for a normal brain, no joke. Sometimes he played a game he invented called the brain game. He asked himself really hard questions and then made up really stupid answers. He didn't know why, but he thought it was very funny. His stupid answers always cracked him up. He liked to make up games, and he liked to put on plays with his toy soldiers and spacemen. That was normal, right? Wow, those 2 crows were really having a battle. They were shrieking and clawing their heads off. They made such a racket. He didn't hear his bedroom door open, and he didn't hear his mother walk into his room. "Why aren't you studying?" Her voice made him jump. He nearly banged his head on the window. His mother had a big, powerful voice. She never whispered. Everything about her was big. She was tall, taller than his father. She had broad shoulders and big hands, and she walked heavily, as if she was wearing boots even when she wasn't. He thought she was kind of pretty. Her eyes were steely gray, and she had a cold stare. But her wavy blonde hair was nice, and when she smiled, her whole face crinkled up, the only time she looked gentle. He turned away from the window to face her. "Just taking a break," he said. He got the cold, silvery stare. "I heard you playing a game before. You are wasting your good brain. Get to your studies." She pointed to the stack of textbooks on his desk. "The great scientists await," she said. Let them wait, he thought. But he said okay, and he shuffled over to the desk. He slid into his big black leather desk chair and opened a science book. She stood there watching him, her arms crossed in front of her white sweater. He pretended to read. He suddenly had an idea for a new puppet show. 2 puppets fighting to the death. "Every day you need to expand your brain," Mother said. "Every day your brain will grow bigger." That made him snicker. It sounded like a horror movie. The brain that wouldn't stop growing. He wasn't allowed to watch horror movies, but he read about them. Finally, Mother strode to the door. She closed it behind her. As soon as she was gone, he stood up and walked over to his puppet shelf. He had marionettes and hand puppets, and a set of finger puppets his grandmother sent him when he was 6. It was a very good puppet collection. He liked to collect things. It made him feel like his room was crowded, and then he wasn't so lonely. He picked up his sad clown puppet. It had a bright red and white striped costume with a red ruffle around its neck, but it had the saddest frown on its face and little teardrops under its eyes. He named the puppet Droopy. He carried Droopy to his desk and made him sit next to a science textbook. "We'll read it together," he told him. "That's what friends do. They share things." He started to read, but voices outside his bedroom door made him stop and look up. Mother and Father were in the hall. They were arguing. This happened a lot. They were talking in hushed whispers. They didn't want him to hear, but the whispers were loud enough. He could hear every word. "Why don't you let him be normal?" Father demanded. Mother didn't reply, so Father continued. "You are turning my son into a freak." "He's our son," Mother said. "I don't care. I don't like what you are doing to him. You have to let him go to school and be with other kids." "He's not like other kids," Mother insisted. He'd heard her say this so many times. He imagined himself grabbing her arms and shaking her and saying, "Yes, I am. Yes, I am like other kids." The crows finally stopped cawing. He could hear his parents' hushed voices so clearly now. "He is too smart for the other kids," Mother said. "He has to study. He has to use his brilliant mind." "You're ruining him," Father told her. Even through the thick door, he could hear the anger in Father's voice. He pictured his face, hard and tight and red. "You're turning him into a freak. He's a weird little freak." A door slammed. He jumped to his feet. He let out a hoarse cry of anger. "No, I'm not," he screamed at the door. "I'm not a freak. Not a freak." He grabbed Droopy. He squeezed his cloth body hard with one hand and ripped off one of his arms. "Not a freak. Not a freak." He tore off Droopy's head and tossed it in the trash basket. He tore off a leg, then another arm, pulling and tearing and screaming. He ripped the striped costume to shreds. His chest was heaving. He couldn't catch his breath. He ripped and clawed at the puppet. It felt good. It really did.